was on the morning of December 6, 1917 that hell broke loose in Halifax in present-day Canada. Two steamships were involved in the disaster, the French SS Mont Blanc and the Norwegian SS Imo. SS Mont Blanc was a floating bomb, an accident just waiting to happen. In its hold were a deadly mixture of various explosives and flammable materials, trotol, picric acid, benzene and cotton powder. Prior to the outbreak of war, ships loaded with dangerous goods did not have access to the port of Halifax, but as the German submarine threat grew after the outbreak of war, more and more exceptions were made to this sound rule until it became routine. Mont Blanc had been forced to anchor outside the harbor during the night of the unfortunate December 6 because it had arrived after the protective submarine nets had been erected. At around 7:30 in the morning, the ship was boarded by a dock worker who maneuvered the ship through the narrow passages and finally steamed the ship into Halifax harbor. According to the rules, ships loaded with dangerous goods were to hoist the red flag, and dock workers who boarded the ship requested an escort ship as a precautionary measure, but neither was done. At the same time, the Norwegian ship SS Imo steamed out of port. The Norwegian captain was annoyed due to delays and had left the port without permission from the harbor master, so his ship was now on a collision course with the floating bomb Mont Blanc. The dock worker at Mont Blanc saw Imo in the distance and signaled in good time with the ship's horn that he had priority. The captain of Imo signaled back with his ship's horn that he did not intend to move out of the way. They continued to exchange angry signals until the collision course went from being a potential danger to becoming an inevitable reality. When it became clear that a collision would occur, the engines on both ships were shut down as an emergency measure, but it was in vain. They had already reached too high a speed and could not be stopped in time. At 8:45 the ships collided. They slid into each other at low speed and the collision was not very violent, but it was enough to overturn and crack barrels with petroleum products on board the Mont Blanc, and the flammable liquids flooded over the deck. When Imo started the engines and freed himself from Mont Blanc, sparks ignited the spilled petroleum products. The fire spread quickly on board and of course the whole thing could only end in one way. With black smoke billowing from the doomed ship, the captain ordered the crew to board the lifeboats. As they rowed away from the now stray ship, it drifted into a pier and ran aground. 9:04 came the inevitable explosion. In its center, the temperature rose in an instant to 5,000 degrees and the harbor floor was exposed as the water evaporated. Mont Blanc was torn to pieces and annealed metal fragments from the hull rained down on Halifax and its surroundings. The anchor's half-ton heavy leg, its frame, was thrown away 3 kilometers. The pressure wave that occurred moved at a speed of 1,000 meters per second, shattered windows and caused church bells to ring as far away as 9 to 10 miles from the center of the explosion. In an instant, about 160 acres of buildings were destroyed as effectively as if an atomic bomb had detonated in the harbor. Photographs of the devastated city are reminiscent of photos of the devastated Hiroshima. Buildings were leveled, trees cracked like matches, railroad tracks were bent like rubber and people were thrown like dolls through the air. Finally, the explosion generated an estimated 16-meter-high tsunami that destroyed everything in its path, including one of the Canadian indigenous settlements, which was completely wiped out. More than 1,600 people died and more than 9,000 were injured in the explosion. Another 300 died later from their injuries. As a parenthesis, it can be mentioned that the number of dead and injured could have been even higher if it were not for a Stins named Vince Coleman. A passenger train was on its way to the scene and Coleman telegraphed to all stations along the line. Stop the train. An ammunition ship is on fire in the harbor, is on its way to Pier 6 and will explode. I guess this will be my last telegram. Goodbye guys. It was as he said his last telegram. He died in the explosion. Investigation was set up to clarify whether it was an accident or a sabotage. German agents had done such a thing in the port of New Jersey the year before, so it was not a far-fetched thought. The investigation succeeded in mapping the course of the accident and was able to rule out sabotage, but the suspicion that it was the work of German agents remained for a long time among the people of Halifax. The port could be quickly put back into use, but the reconstruction of the destroyed buildings could not be done overnight, even if it was desirable. The accident left 25,000 Halifax residents homeless. In addition, the infrastructure had been severely damaged. The explosion tore off electricity, telephone, water, and gas lines. The reconstruction took years to complete, but from the ashes a partly new city would rise during the post-war years. Although the price was appallingly high, the disaster eventually led to a higher standard of living for the people of Halifax. The total destruction gave the architects and city plans a free hand. They redesigned the streets so that they became less steep and built modern residential buildings surrounded by green areas. The explosion in Halifax is the worst accident in Canadian history to date and also one of the worst accidents in modern history. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki were atomically bombed almost 30 years later, the Halifax explosion was used as a comparative measure in newspapers, and it is alleged that Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, studied the accident in an attempt to predict the effects of an atomic bomb explosion. This enormous devastation thus came about when a single cargo ship exploded. It shows the unimaginably great destructive power that was unleashed during the First World War.